Joanna. And my talk, The Art of Testing. And generally speaking, the way how we see testing, how it is done in companies. So I wasn't really surprised that we didn't see so many hands when the question was asked, who likes to test, who is doing testing. Obviously, it's not something which is very enjoyable, especially if we don't really see the benefit of it. And this is what I want to change in this talk. So I want to go through the different testing types. I want to explain you to the advantages, disadvantages, and maybe you find out at the end that the way how you did testing until now, good point, the way that you did testing until now was probably the wrong type. Good. So Sham, so we should see actually my slides because that's still me. Yeah, no, it's there. Good. No, I don't want to share anything. Good. So I skipped my own introduction. So I'm Renner, part of Inglo Architects, coming from Austria, and yeah. I would like to start with the very ancient testing pyramid that has been the model for testing for many years, and I want to try to challenge that one. But first, let me quickly show you the application or the feature that we have. So we have here a so-called quiz component. You know how quizzes usually work. You're asked a bunch of questions, you have your multiple choice answers, then you click on them, and then depending if the answer is right or wrong, it's going to print out here correct 0 or incorrect 1. That's what we actually want to test. If we take a look into our application, then we see it's quite structured, I would say. So we have here, first of all, 4 different types in our directory. I'm using here a so-called smart component, which in the end is called quiz component. It is delegating the UI part to UI components, which is why the template here is quite small. And when it comes to the logic, I'm using a quiz store, which means that this quiz store is kind of doing again all the logic. So the smart component here is just kind of delegating things. The rest is then distributed here to all the different files that we have. Please remember, the quiz component, again, it has one dependency when it comes to services, which is the quiz store. And it has 2 dependencies when it comes to the UI, which is the status and the question component. Good. So if we now want to test this, then probably the way how we do it is that we want to write a unit test for it. And if you're using the Angular CLI, then the Angular CLI is always generating you already a spec file per file that you generate. And there are different definitions of unit testing, but a common one is that we are saying we are trying to mock everything away, which are the dependencies of that particular class, and we even ignore that the template, in the case of a component, does even exist. So that would be the way how a unit test would work. And if we transition back here to our application, then I have here my quiz component spec, which is that kind of unit test already. So you see here what I'm doing. I'm creating a mock for the only service which I have, which is the quiz store. I know that the quiz store will be called by using answer and set ID. So I'm creating here a SPY ingest. When ingested would be a mock. Then I'm overriding the component. I'm saying I'm going to removing all the UI components which I'm importing because I don't want to deal with all that stuff. And in the end, I say here testbed configure testing module, and I'm creating then the quiz component. Then I have a class of that particular component. I take that class and I say, well, if the only thing a user can do is that they can just click on a button, which means internally someone is calling handle answer. And this is the method that I'm calling here, and then I'm just verifying that the quiz store answer is called with the right parameters. If I run this test with code coverage, I have 100% code coverage for the complete quiz store component at least. I would have now, if I want to follow that approach, I would not have to do this for all the different files that I have. I'm not going to open them because the tests will all look the same. And this kind of testing style is something which is very common. And well, the question is now, is this something we should do? Probably not for this application, but let's go through the advantages and disadvantages. So if we look at this kind of unit test, then the main argument, and this is also what the testing pyramid is using, is that it's very, very fast. So unit tests are the fastest ones that we can have. There is no DOM included, nothing else. It's just calling classes, calling methods of classes and asserting against properties. They are also usually exploratory, so I could say, because I can set up the mocks in any way how I want, I can test edge cases very, very easily. Yeah, that's true. A consequence of this is that it's also very easy to find bugs because I'm not testing so much. It's just the component. If this test fails, I don't need to look in the dependencies because it's just a component and nothing else. And that's also true. Generally speaking, those of you who would apply test-driven development, we know from practice that it kind of enforces us to write good code quality. So we will never write a quiz component where I'm importing 10 different services. I will also never write a quiz component which is importing, I don't know, other things, because the test is just then too hard. So I try usually to keep the files very small, keep the dependencies also very small, a few dependencies, and that's the way how it is. But there are now a few disadvantages, quite big ones, to be honest. The first one is you can't do a real refactoring, a test-based refactoring. If our quiz component would contain the complete feature, so if I would have never done this split up into multiple pieces, then I would now expect, if I have a test of this quiz component, that I can now do a refactoring, meaning I'm not changing the way how my feature works. It works exactly the same. Users don't really see a difference. But I would now start to kind of split out different UI components. I would start creating services, actually what I already have done. The problem with unit tests is that you are so coupled to the implementation of the class. You're calling methods of the class, you're asserting properties of the class. If I'm going to extract a method into a service, I immediately have to update, of course, my test as well. And this also kind of applies also to the UI part. Again, if I'm extracting parts of the UI, then it's just not there. Which means as soon as I want to do a refactoring, I also have to refactor my test, which is absolutely not what I want. I don't want to change the test because I'm doing a refactoring. I want to have an assurance of the tests that the refactoring was successful. That's the point, which we don't get from unit tests. We also have a high maintainability, which is again a consequence. If I'm so much coupled to the implementation, then every small change in the implementation will cause me already to again update the test. So I have spent quite a lot of time in rewriting these tests. I have, of course, a low coverage because I don't test so much with a single test, and the confidence, to be honest, is also not that high. I would not trust an application if I only have unit tests and nothing else. So that's it about the unit tests. Yeah? So there are some advantages, but we also have to accept that there are serious disadvantages. The extreme opposite would then be the end-to-end test. Yeah? So in the end-to-end test, we say we don't mock anything. We just run the complete application, and I don't even care if I'm running Angular, if I'm running another framework. I'm just putting myself into the position of an end user, and I'm doing exactly what my end users are also doing, kind of visually testing my application. So an end-to-end test would look like this. So in this case, I chose VS Code. I'm using Playwright, which is the one that I would recommend at the moment for certain reasons, which I will not explain here. But in the end, it is very easy to write end-to-end tests. You see here a few lines. There is no mocking. The code, if I would make it a little bit larger, you would also be able to read it a little bit better. But in the end, it's not hard to write the test, and the coverage is quite huge. So which means if I, again, would then run here the test, then the nice thing about Playwright, if the application would actually run, is that here a browser opens, I see exactly what my test is going to do. I can even interact with my application if I want to. And the nice thing is also there are some things like, I don't know, you can click in the source code on certain selectors and it's automatically highlighting in the browser the position where it is. So that's just wonderful, a wonderful way on how to write tests. So what are now the advantages of end-to-end tests? I mean, first of all, the developer experience compared to unit tests is much, much better. One also has to say that's more related also to the tooling that we have. We also have, given the time that we are investing in a test, the end-to-end test always gives us the highest return of investment because I'm covering so much. We are also testing against the real environment. So we can be very sure if we run an end-to-end testing that we can say the application will behave exactly the same way in a production environment as well. So that's very close to the thing that we actually want. And we don't really have to deal with these technical challenges that we usually have. And by that, I mean, we don't have to care, we don't even have to think about triggering a change detection manually. It just works because it's the application. We don't have to care about asynchronous tasks that in other tests we have to run synchronously or we need to manage them somehow. Again, modern end-to-end testing have something built in which are able to manage those asynchronous tasks. So these tools will wait for them to be executed. We don't have to care about it. And we also don't have to deal with DOM events. So if, for example, if I want to say I want to communicate with the template a little bit, then very often I need to know exactly what kind of DOM events are dispatched. Because, for example, in Angular, if we have a form group or a form control, that one is listening to an input event. And that's why it's not enough if we just set the value property of an input field. We also need to dispatch the input event. And these are things we all need to know, which is not a problem if we are doing end-to-end tests. So why not doing just end-to-end tests all the time? Now, first of all, because they are very slow. That's going to be improved. But second, we have a high coupling. Very often, high coupling between tests, not with the implementation. Very often, end-to-end tests run also against the database, which means every test has a potential to change something, to change the current situation, and the next test needs to be aware of that. There are then ways on how you can kind of work against it, like every test starts to set up its own context, which is again a very hard task, but this is really challenging because you run up in a sequential dependency chain, and as soon as you're sequential, you can't really parallelize tests anymore, which bites you back when it comes to parallelization. So in the end, what I always say, end-to-end tests are really nice. They are really very powerful, but we only have a limited amount available. That's the problem with end-to-end tests. And also, this depends on the company. Sometimes you can't do a full end-to-end test because the backend is not there, because the infrastructure cannot be set up in the right way in the CI, and then you end up only testing the front end and nothing else, which is also a little bit of a waste of resources. Could be better. Again, end-to-end tests, nothing against them, but we are limited in the amount that we have. Which means we need to go to the third testing type, which are now the integration tests. Or you can also call them component tests. I don't really make that much of a difference there. But the point here is that I'm now, again, going back in terms of tooling. I would use Jasmine, vtest, or Jest. And 15? 10, okay, good. I would go back to the other tooling, and the way how I would communicate with my test is now always via the DOM. So I'm really trying not to run methods. I also try not to assert against certain properties, but I interact with my component by clicking on buttons, by typing something in, and I'm also asserting via the DOM. I say I want to see something, this is what I want to assert for, not what the value of a property is in a component. That's not so interesting. I really want to see something. And additionally, I also have to try to reduce the amount of mocks. So I try to include as much of the dependencies that I can. And of course, there are then some things which we have to mock, which is especially the HTTP communication or some other completely huge services which we don't want to include. But the approach of an integration test is to test a complete feature with everything that it requires. And we have an integration test here already. The integration test is part of this one here. It's the quiz spec. What do we see here? First of all, a very long setup. So I'm providing here an HTTP client. Since I want to mock the HTTP client, I'm using that part that Angular provides. I also have then a router. So I also want to try to include as much as possible of the routing system as well, because it plays a big role for my feature. And you see here, I don't mock anything. It's just a quiz component, the quiz store is there, except the HTTP client, everything is included. Then I'm going to set up the class, and that then depends on the way how you do it. But in my case, I can really simulate a navigation to my component. So I say I want to navigate to quiz 1, because I would now expect that this quiz component consumes number 1 and starts to load the quiz data. And I don't care how it does it. That's why I'm using here the testing harness from Angular. They will take care of it. And the same is then also true for the HTTP client. I don't care who or how the HTTP communication works, if it's done with an HTTP resource, if it's done with a normal HTTP client or whatever. I just say, whenever this request here goes out, I want to answer it by that particular test data. So I have here a test data for a quiz. And then, you see here I'm using certain tooling. Again, it's just almost like an end-to-end test. So I'm really navigating, I'm really looking for question labels. I say, okay, I'm looking for this question, which says programming language, and then I want to click here on a button that says TypeScript, and at the end, I want to say, okay, correct 1, because I hopefully have answered the question correctly. So a lot of things to do, but let me tell you, this is the only test you need to write for the complete quiz feature. I don't need to test the quiz store, the quiz service, the quiz question component, the quiz status component. Everything is already included there. I am done. I wouldn't have now 100% code coverage because, again, the quiz feature doesn't do so much. It's very straightforward. There is not so much logic. And that's also one of the very important things, one of the very important arguments. So integration tests have this advantage that we have a very high coverage. That's the way how it is. We have now the possibility to refactoring. I can switch from the quiz store to a signal store. I can use NGRX Global Store if I want. As long as the outcome is always the same, I don't have to touch the test. That just one stays alive or stays as it is. Because of that, I don't have to change the test so often. The maintenance is also quite lower. And I also have much, much more confidence in it. So I know that all the things are playing together quite nicely. The downside is that the setup is not easy. It takes a long time, very often, to come up with the right testbed configuration. That's not a secret. They are also slower than unit tests. Yeah, that's also true. And that was it for the disadvantages. It was already my next slide. But generally speaking now, given the limits that we have with end-to-end tests, although they would be very good, and given that unit tests very often, and I'm now exaggerating a little bit or provoking it, is a waste of time, we see that we end up very often in the middle area where we could say that's the right compromise of having a good quality of the test, a good coverage, that we can also trust, where we can also then finally find some bugs, and where we can say the amount of work that we put into a test is worth it. That's the idea. And we see that for many years now, this kind of approach has really shifted. What you see here is called the testing trophy from Kent Dodds. It's actually already, I think, 10 years old. And here the idea is that we really start first maybe focusing our efforts into integration tests. So I have a certain feature which I want to test, and then I could use code coverage, or I just use the intuition that I say there are probably some certain edge cases which are not covered by this integration test and which I don't want to cover, and that's then the perfect fit for unit tests. But I always start with integration tests to cover the big range. Good. I'm not alone with this opinion. There was a Q&A session from the Angular team in last September from Jeremy Elborn, who is the lead of the complete Angular project. In a way, he said the same things. What he said additionally is when it comes to replacing services, before you go to mocks, try to find something else, which is a fake. Jeremy is not the only one. Eunice JD is also promoting the fakes approach quite often. And the last resort is then just really only the mocks themselves. Good. So, and in the end, it's always about finding the right balance. Yeah, If the more your application is straightforward, the more you only fetch data, show it, and send it back to the backend, there are no if conditions or so, the more the integration tests shine. But one also has to say, the more logic you have, the more unit tests probably you want to apply, because you have so many edge cases, you probably also have to lean a little bit more towards unit tests. But in all cases, I would really start with integration tests first, and then go to unit tests or go to unit tests. So there is now one more thing. If I now say integration tests should be the favored, the best testing options which we have available, then the problem is the tooling is not really quite nice. So you've seen it's quite a lot of effort to write these tests. There are a lot of challenges, change detection, asynchronous tasks, DOM events, whatever. And we have already fixed this in the past. So Cypress, as an end-to-end testing framework, was already able to give you component tests, which means you can write a component test configuration. Cypress will compile this set of your application, will boot up an application, and that allows you then to test the application like a real end-to-end test, but with all the disadvantages. The problem is that that Cypress end-to-end testing, or Cypress in general, is now a little bit in a decline. We see quite a lot of people are shifting to Playwright. And there is one particular person in the community who has been very active when it comes to developing prototypes and doing some stuff in this area. That's Yunus Chahidi. And he did the first prototype of Cypress component testing, so he was behind it. And then he shifted and started to work a little bit on the Playwright component testing. There have been multiple integrations, and since I'm already kind of praising him, I thought it's also nice if we could just call him at the end, and that he can give us a little bit of an outlook of what we can expect for the future for the tooling of testing. Because if we would get end-to-end testing, end-to-end component testing, that would be great. Good. So that's now the time where I hope the audio is working. And also Yunus is here. Hi, Yunus.
Hey.
Yeah, they see you, but you don't see them. But yeah, you can give us a quick overview of the current
Okay,
state.
good. Wait a second. See? Un'arancina al nero di seppia. Sorry for this. Have to finish cooking my stuff. So yeah, we were talking about Playwright component testing.
Yes, all that stuff. Yeah, just give it a quick overview. We don't have so much time. Yeah,
I'm in the middle of the kitchen.
They can do it alone. Yeah.
And so the problem with the Playwright component testing is that, well, we tried something from the community, then we tried a PR on Playwright community on the Playwright repo, and the problem with the Playwright's experimental component testing is that the way it works, it's hard for them to support all frameworks. And users have to configure their own Vite server, which is annoying for us as Angular developers, like have Angular CLI and you have to have the Vite server. And that is why I refused the PR. They're working on the component testing, which requires a lot of things for the frameworks. And that is why we decided to create Testronaut. It means you, right? And I was thinking, Rainer, what do you think? What if we just show it right now?
Yeah, if we have a few minutes left, I can quickly give you an overview how it looks like. But in the end, the problem is, as Yunus said it, in case you didn't understand it, the PR for Playwright component testing was finished. Playwright declined it, saying they don't have the amount of resources to support it. And since Yunus has all the knowledge already what it takes to write something like this, we decided to come up with a community project, which we call Testronaut. And the Testronaut is right here. So you see it already. And just a quick overview of what you can expect. It's not an official release. You should just be aware that we are working on it. Let me quickly zoom in. You have here the testbed configuration that you have in any integration test. But after that, Playwright will, or the Testronaut will compile this setup into a small application which only contains these parts. And this small application you can then use by normal Playwright end-to-end testing to test it. Which means you don't have the full application with all the disadvantages of end-to-end testing, but you also have the advantages of end-to-end testing, that in this case, you don't have to care about the changes action, asynchronous tasks, DOM events, and even more, you see something finally. You see what's going on. It's fully integrated into Playwright. Playwright even is not aware that we are not running here an end-to-end test. Let me quickly check it out. So it's a demo, so I can always fail, as we know. So we see here, for example, a trace view. This is the component test, and for the first time, you really see also something, if the image here would come. So you see here all the different, the way how the component looks like. You can go here through all the different steps. Let me make this a little bit larger. So in the end, you wouldn't see here this correct, which only comes from the quiz component, and the rest of the application is not just part of this test or not. So this is what we had already with Cypress with component testing. Now it's the same with the learnings of Cypress, that we do not want to kind of reinvent the wheel of providing our own builder process. This was always the problem with these external tools. We are relying fully on the Angular CLI. So Angular CLI is doing the build for us, and we don't have to care about it. We are just making the connection with end-to-end testing. As I said, it's still in development. This was not meant to be a full announcement yet, but you should just be aware of. If you want to stay up to date, there is also a folder. Eunice, you're just again going away. That's the test runout. There's also a Discord channel, but once we have it, we will probably go to a lot of meetings. You will probably also see us at other conferences, and we will then also come up with documentation and everything which is necessary. Good, but for now, mille grazie and thanks a lot, and also